Good morning. I know that a large amount of you are going to be working on the reassessment today for Chapter 8 reading quiz, and I just wanted to give you a few pointers as you work on that today. First and foremost, most of us believed that we had to pull evidence out of this particular statement by Wood to cite him as evidence, but we need to pull outside evidence to prove what he is saying. There are two arguments in this passage, one that the revolution was and did bring about radical change, and the other is arguing against the fact that the revolution created radical change. So you have to address both of those in Part 1 and Part 2 of this question. Given that Wood argues that the revolution was in fact revolutionary, even at the socio-political level, you need to identify examples of those radical changes being made to colonial values or colonial society in order to support his argument here. One possible example would be, the shift in the perception of women. Obviously, they didn't gain a whole lot of rights directly as a result of the revolution, but the perception of women changed, and there's evidence to prove that, and statements that prove that. So you need to pull out evidence like that to prove his argument. On the contrary, identifying examples of the preservation of elements of aristocracy, or in other words, the rich stayed rich and the white male leaders of society stayed in power. You need to pull out examples of that still being in place, and you could reference something of the way in which there was a very big freedom of property influence from the aristocracy in fighting the Revolutionary War. So referencing those ideas might help you as well. Again, just a reminder, make sure that when you're addressing both question 1 and 2, don't spend a lot of time writing or citing passages from Wood's quotation, but spend more of the time giving examples of either how the revolution brought about radical change, or arguing, like Part 2, how it did not bring about radical change. So spend your time writing in those areas. In regards to question 2 here, the American Revolution helped establish many American values. Part 1 says, choose one of the values listed below and provide at least one piece of evidence demonstrating how Americans embodied that ideal during the struggle for independence from Britain. So whether you choose liberty, equality, or justice, you have to take yourself back to the build-up towards the revolution, towards independence, and find out what was it that the colonists were seeking in the way of liberties or freedoms that maybe didn't exist or were being taken away from the monarchy of England. Things, one example that comes to mind is representation or right to property, those things. So find examples, if you're going to use liberty, that go along the lines of freedoms or rights that were being taken away from colonists in regards to liberty. Along the lines of equality, anything that colonists were seeking in the way of being more equal as a common man, or a property owner, or having a say in any kind of voting process. Any examples of that would fit into a piece of evidence supporting Americans embodying the ideal of equality. In regards to justice, you have to think back to examples of where maybe the monarchy or England was giving punishments or injustices in the way of how they were treating the colonists in certain situations. I don't want to give you the example, but I will, just because the Boston Massacre and the results of that massacre surrounded a lot of injustice in the way that that situation was handled. So whether you use liberty, equality, or justice, you got to cite at least one example of how colonists were embodying those principles, and there's lots of examples to draw from each of those. Reference back to your book if you need to, but spend your time writing about the examples of them embodying those. Based on the values you chose in Part A, identify a source of inspiration for the colonists and explain how they came to esteem that principle. So when we're talking about liberty, equality, and justice, these are big ideals. A lot of you referenced George Washington as an inspiration for these things, but he was more of an example of an inspiration during the fighting that kept the colonists motivated to keep the fight going, whereas we need to be referencing guys like Thomas Paine and John Locke and anybody who took part in spreading the ideas to the colonists, getting them fired up about these things to motivate them towards pursuing these through revolution or a fight for independence. So focus your examples of inspiration along those ideas, and I gave you a couple hints there of some guys and their ideas to use as solid examples. Remember to explain your examples in as much detail as you can to prove that you understand the link between the question and the examples that you're giving. Good luck, and we'll see you on Wednesday.